We're going to talk about weeds. It's now, but it isn't, oh, it is raining here, so now we start being able to see the weeds that are coming along even this early. There are a few that will survive in the winter, but we're going to talk about lots of different kinds of weeds, a little bit of sort of weed biology, and then some ways that you can deal with weeds. And we'll see if this works to go off. Well, we've got to make it. Oh, there it goes. So what makes a plant a weed? And so, especially with cut flower growers, there are some things that other people might call weeds that you're actually harvesting and selling as part of your bouquets. And then there are some things, this is a low growing chickweed in the picture, that it's a weed, it's not a plant you want, but it may not interfere with your farm activities enough to really be something that you feel you must control. So there's the estimation of what a weed is kind of up to everyone. They do compete for resources. So if you have a lot of other plants growing with your cut flowers, they're also using water and nutrients. They can also host diseases and insects. And again, knowing something about the disease and insect to know if it's something that can be hosted by a weed as well as by the crop that you're growing is useful information. But again, everyone makes the decision on how many weeds, what level of weediness they can tolerate, and how it works in the operation. So, for example, if you're the only one that's out in the field and getting around and moving around the weeds is not a problem, then you might leave more than if it was something where the general public was out there harvesting and the weeds were in their way, or might be vice versa. So the biggest issue is that you are trying to grow plants and control plants at the same time. So you want to grow your crop and control weeds, and they are very related, much more related than an insect or disease is with the crop plant. Let's see, it seems like I should just be, I can. Okay, so I put this two in again with the idea of what is a weed and what is not. This one is white clover. You might actually want that one in your field because it fixes nitrogen and so it helps with fertility. Now, Christmas tree growers will tell me that it can be slippery to walk on, and when they're shearing, that's an issue and may also be an issue for you. It's low growing, so it's not a problem that way, but it does have some advantages. This one, and this kind of put it in to remind me that sometimes people do harvest things that other people consider weeds. Do not harvest this one. This is wild parsnip, and it has a photodermatitis. So the sap from this plant, when it gets on your skin, will give you a rash, and then it's also reacts to light. And I have seen some incredibly nasty burn-looking rashes based from this plant. You can find it along almost all the roadsides in the summer. It's very happily growing. It's very pretty, but don't harvest it. And then also everybody's weed pressure and the types of weeds or the kind of weeds they have varies. This is actually, I think, from some work we did at Agritech and just looking in each different treatment space how many species there are and how many of each one there are. They vary all over the map in a relatively small space. So you need to know a little bit about what are the weeds that you most want to control and then how you'll go about that. You may not need to worry, again, you may not need to worry about everything. It's just figuring out what are the problems for you and where do they come in terms um, of being a problem and also how you're going to manage them. Some things we do manage everything, so that's kind of a nice thing. And then I don't know when I found this slide that I clearly made some other time when I must have been in a musical thought. But anyway, this was a picture that someone sent me that's pretty impressive that that sunflower seed managed to land in the tarmac between the tarmac and the rock and find enough space and water and nutrients to grow. So you will have weeds if there is any kind of medium or space for them to find a place to be, and it doesn't have to be very big. So this is the theory that all pest control is based on the biology, physiology, or behavior of the pest. So the more that you know about those things, the more efficient your pest control can be. So if you're controlling rhinoceroses, that's a hippopotamus, sorry. If you're controlling hippopotamuses, you need to know something about where they feed, how they feed, where they're going to move in order to manage them. We luckily don't have any in our flower fields. I did work somewhere where that was a problem for production. Um, but you need to know as much as you can about the weeds to help you with controlling them. So that we're going to cover things like plant type, life cycle, and how they reproduce, and that all fits into the concept of knowing the biology, physiology, or behavior of the pest. The other thing too is that's very true about weed populations is that, and any pest population really, is if you can act when the population is small or in its most vulnerable stage, you will have the most efficient and effective control. If you waited till the plant is as big as that sunflower was, you may have to do something more. It may be more difficult to get rid of it than if you got it when it was a small seedling. And so knowing when to treat is partly based on the knowledge that you have of the weeds and partly scouting so that you're looking for things so you see them early on. So sometimes it's just specifically going out looking. Sometimes it's just noticing when you're doing something else. You might actually want to mark whatever you see. That's why there's a picture of tape there. So you might even carry that in your pocket. So when you're out in the field, if you see something, it's like tie a piece of flagging tape there to remind you where whatever it was, and then to come back and do something about it. And then you'll start knowing over time as you get more experience, you'll know the patterns of when things happen, when they come in, when they become problems, so you have a better idea of what you need to be doing for weed management. So the two types of weeds, there's technically three, I suppose, but and we do see one of the third one. We tend to break them into grasses and broadleaves. And so the real reason there is that physiologically they react differently to herbicides. And so that's one of the reasons we want to know. So broadleaves have wide leaves. They tend to have branching veins. Grasses have narrow leaves usually, and they have parallel veins. Sedges are a little different. That's the third one. Sedges have edges. They have triangular stems. So if you roll the stem between your fingers, you'll feel it bump. Oops, it's advancing on me without my asking. Hopefully, it's not set up that way. But they do have narrow leaves and they look a lot like grass. So we get a lot of nut sedges in this area, and that can be a problem because they can be pretty dense. In terms of the types of weeds and life cycles, if you're growing flowers, you probably know some of these words, if not all of them. And again, this is looking at when to manage them. So we have annuals, we have biennials, so they don't flower the first season, but they do the second, and then they die. And we have perennials that come up and flower year after year. With annuals, there are what are considered summer annuals and winter annuals, and they have a little difference in terms of when they're out there and when there can be a problem and when you might want to manage them. And then creeping perennials where they move and they maybe move really quickly. So if you have them in one spot and you actually control them there, they may have already started moving out into other areas through underground stems or rhizomes. And so you might need to consider how you control them so that you manage that creeping behavior as well. So summer annuals are what we think of as an annual. They get planted in the spring and then they grow up. How interesting. Oops. It's decided to go. It's like it's following my hand. That's not a good thing. They grow up in the spring and the summer, and then they die off in the fall. Now, that might be great if we are looking at this flower as a flower, but what we want for a summer annual is to control it somewhere in here before it ever starts setting seed. And you'll hear me say that at least another time because I've got a slide on it. Because what we're really trying to avoid is seed set and having those seeds hit the soil. So you want to control it earlier than that. In a winter annual, they actually start in the fall, they get some growth, they overwinter, and then you see that they're starting to set their seed much earlier, often in late spring. So you really need to pay attention to those if it's a winter annual that you're trying to manage to get control on them before they go to seed, and they'll do that earlier. And then the third biology piece that I'll throw in here is reproduction. And so I've just been talking about seed. So yeah, see, we're interested in seed reproduction. If you've got a plant that produces seeds, and most weeds produce a lot of seeds, it's one of the things that makes them a weed. Then that's if you can avoid producing seed or having the plant produce seed, you're ahead. If it's got vegetative reproduction, you might need to think about what that is. Is it underground? Is it something where, that you need to think about pieces rooting And so again, it affects what type of management you might want to use. So this is I think this is a pigweed of some sort. And they produce all these little flowers are all going to produce seeds. So they produce a huge amount of seed. So anytime you can get that plant, good heavens, get that plant taken care of before it goes to seed, you're better off. And this is purslane, not very tall growing, might not be a problem that way. But this one, if you chop it up into pieces, every little piece will root. So if you use tillage on something like this, you may actually spread it. Whereas if you could come through and just get the one out, then it's not going to spread as easily. So again, knowing a little bit about the biology of your pests, of your plants, of your weeds, pest weeds. So how do you find out all this stuff? That's a lot of information to try and gather all this behavior and everything else. This Weeds of the Northeast, goodness, nope, we're going forward and back here. The Weeds of the Northeast is kind of the Bible for weed management, or for weed identification, sorry. It's just been revised not too long ago, what, in the last 5 years, I believe. It actually was written, actually it was a master's project for a student at Cornell to write the first one. It's really good to have. If you have a set of resources, this one should be in it. One of the things that I like about it a lot is that it has a section for each weed. It's like other things that look like it, and also pictures of um, not just the adult weed or the big weed, but also of the seedlings. Because again, sometimes we want to get them when they're small, and if you know that's the particular weed, especially if it's a weed you have problems with, that's helpful information. This is also available. This is online. It's under the Turf and Landscape Weed ID for Cornell. And to start out, it's a key. So you go in and you pick, is it a grass or a broadleaf? And then it will give you a whole bunch more things that you can use. So for example, you can say, okay, it's a broadleaf and the leaf arrangement is opposite. Click on that, and it'll give you um, more ways to limit the search. So somebody asked the Weeds of the Northeast is not digital. That one you have to buy as a hard copy. And I'm sure you can go online and find it, but you can also find it in lots of other places too. Certainly, certainly bookstores around here might have it because we've got lots of weedy people. And this one is online. This is also by Cornell. This is actually more on management, but you can either buy it if you want a hard copy or you can download it. And you can find it through SARE.org under resources. It's called Manage Weeds on Your Farm. I think if you Googled Manage Weeds on Your Farm, you would also find it. It's got things. This is just part of the table of contents. All sorts of different kinds of weed management information on all of those, and then a lot of information on individual weeds as well. So it's a really great resource, and the fact that it's free online is pretty impressive. Okay. Um, oh, thanks, Yolana. And so let's start talking about how to do all this management. Now that you have all this great knowledge and you know the behavior and you know all sorts of things about your weeds, now you need to start thinking about how to manage them. And the first thing to think about, and I always this sort of winter spring planning time, is to think about what tools you have and what tools you're willing to use. Are you willing to use herbicides? If so, which ones? Some people will only use certain types and other people will use anything. If you're looking just to be, if you're certified organic, then you might only be able to use the ones that are OMRI listed or that are acceptable for certified organic operations. And then, how much labor do you have? How much time do you have? All those things will come into which management tools you have and which ones you use. So there's a few things in terms of planning. When you're planning out your plant rows, are you going to try and get a tiller between them or a mower between them? So make sure that you have enough space between your rows that you can get the equipment through there. Are you cultivating the beds? That's something that can be done early and that can get rid of weeds at the initial level. Also, if you tend to get perennial weeds, cultivating them, of course, you may have to do some kind of digging them out if they've been there for a while to start, but cultivating will help with those as well. And also, spring is a time when you'd put down pre-emergence herbicides, which I'll talk about in a second, and then making sure you have any mulching materials you want. You might also be putting those down in the spring. Some go down before you're planting, some go down after you've got plants up, depending on what kind you use. So pre-emergence herbicides, you can sort of, this is not a cut flower field, but you can kind of tell this is an untreated plot where they didn't put down a pre-emergence herbicide. On the sides they did, and you can see there's very few weeds that are coming up through the soil, so emerging in the pre-emergence treated plots. So what happens is that compound inhibits the root and shoot of the seed once it starts to germinate, so it interrupts the germination. So they start to germinate, they're interrupted, and then they never emerge from the soil. If you're planting with a direct seeding in the field, you need to make sure that you get your seed in and those plants are starting to come up before you use a pre-emergence, because that pre-emergence, it's generally non-specific. Well, it may be specific between grass and broadleaf, but if you've got one that's going to control broadleaves, most of the plants you're growing are broadleaves, and it will interfere with their emergence as well. With plugs, it's not as important because you've already got a plant that you're putting in, and so I would probably treat before I put the plugs in, make sure you've got that pre-emergent working, and then get your plugs in. There are more pre-emergent herbicides that are available for grasses than there are for broadleaf control. Some will do some of each. You have to pay attention to the labels to know what it says it will control. And most of the time, well, pre-emergents are not as broad spectrum as some of the other very broad spectrum herbicides that are out there, but those don't tend to get used in the spring. They tend to get used later. And the other thing to think about with pre-emergence, we tend to think, oh, great, we put it on and there's no emergence. We don't have any weeds for the whole season. Unfortunately, that's not true. Anything that after that pre-emergence has kind of broken down, any seed that starts to germinate after that can then germinate and come up through the soil. They have different lengths of time that they're active, and you need to find that out from the label as well. It's always, if you're going to put one down, it'd be nice to have it be as active as long as possible. But again, why that may interfere if you've got sequential planting of a crop in an area. So all those things need to be considered when you're deciding what to use. And then in mulching, the intent with mulch as far as weed control goes, because you can use mulches for a lot of different reasons, but you're trying to block the light that's used for germination and growth by the weed. So you can use organic mulches. Make sure if you're getting an organic mulch that you're not like straw, you're not adding something that adds weed seeds. Um, the difference between straw and hay is important there. And you can plant yourself a lovely lawn if you're planting something that has the grass plants that have their seeds still on them. And then organic materials break down, which is helpful to the soil actually, but in terms of weed management, you might need to replace it multiple times. And then you could use landscape fabric or paper or plastic. This is from Heirloom Soil Farms Florals, which is over near Buffalo. And they from their website, and they have some nice blog posts about weed management. This is where they're trying out paper. Um, everybody has a different opinion on how those all work. Again, sometimes you just need to do it and see if it works for you. But you might use it for your walkways, you might plant into it. You have to figure out how you're going to keep it from flying away. If you're in a really windy location, you might need to consider that. And then you're looking at how long it lasts. Can you take it up? Do you have to leave it in place? What's the cost over time? All of those things. You can get on either kind, you can get weeds growing on top of the mulches. You can get weeds coming up through all the holes that you've put in the mulch to put your plants in. I've been keeping my finger over the button and that seems to be working, but at any rate. And then make sure that you know what's going on with water and the soil temperature. This is black plastic, so it heats up the soil and it doesn't necessarily, not very many people use clear plastic for mulch, but we'll talk about that in another topic. But so understand what's going on with water and temperature of the soil. Often if you've got this plastic down like this or paper, you'd have drip tape underneath it also. So that's another piece to fit in there. Okay, now you've gotten everything planted, you're in the middle of the season, you're getting all set to start harvesting, and everything is perfect. But when you're planting it again and you're getting all these things put out, is make sure that you know how, so think about how you're watering and whether or not you can get water just to your plants or more specifically to the plants you want and keep it away from the weeds. So drip irrigation is helpful for that. So you're not watering the walkways. And so that will restrict weed growth a little bit at least. I mean, not perfect because the water does move through the soil, but at least it helps. Same thing with fertility. So if you're putting fertilizer down, if you broadcast it over the whole field, now you're feeding weeds. If you're laying it or either running it through the drip tape or laying it down just where the plants are that you want, then that helps prevent it from getting to the weeds as well. And during the season, physical removal of weeds, you could be hoeing, you could be hand weeding, again, based on what weeds you have and how much of a problem they are for you and how much time and labor you have. Those are all important things. I think in some cases, getting anything that's a perennial weed, especially if you have perennial plots or you're not tilling in between seasons, is making sure you get those out before they get really well established. And especially the ones that are either creeping or have underground systems for reproduction. Um, if you can get them out early, that'll save you time in the long run. You may want to mow between your rows of plants just to keep those plants low and so you can walk on them easily. And also then you're cutting the tops off so that they don't go to seed. Remember, some plants, it's not just the top that goes to seed. If you cut off that top seed head, you'll start getting side shoots that are also flowering. But it helps. And then there are post-emergence herbicides that you would put down over the plants, over the weeds when you've got them. Again, now you're trying to grow a plant, so make sure that you're not treating your plants, your crop plants, with something that's going to affect them, an herbicide that's going to affect them. So it may be that you do more grass control because most of your plants that you're growing are broadleaves. Again, some people are willing to use them and some people are not. And sometimes it's just I need to do something. And so they become sort of a backup plan for something that just didn't happen or went wrong in the season. This is again, so I'm just going to talk about seeds a lot. The soil weed seed bank is the fact that anytime a seed lands on the soil, it doesn't mean it's going to germinate as soon as it gets there. And so you can develop an immense number of seeds that are happily sitting in the soil and are just sitting there, waiting until the time is right. The time and right might be they get tilled up and now they come up to the surface and they get the sunlight they need. The time is right might be the environment or rain or all sorts of things. There's they can stay in the soil for a long time. This is a picture. Um, I had heard about this study long ago and I went and looked it up. So it was at Michigan State University 144 years ago at the minimum. They actually collected seed, put it in bottles, buried the bottles so that it got the same sort of temperatures and so forth that it would get in the soil. And they started digging one up every 5 years. Then they went to every 10 years, up to every 20 years. I think there are 4 bottles left. They're thinking of going to every 30 years. They dig up the bottles, they open them up, and they plant the seed that's in them. And this species is still germinating after 144 years. That's that's impressive. And so somebody's asking about hoop houses, and you do have weed management issues in hoop houses, especially ones that have open sides. Weed seeds can blow in. It does affect what you can use for herbicides within a hoop house. That's another limitation there. Um, but so they'll help somewhat, but maybe they're not going to keep all weeds out unless you've got something sealed up so that nothing goes in. And you have to clean your feet off before you go in too, because you'll carry them in. And so again, so this is the kind of numbers of seeds. So just velvet leaf has got a fairly large seed, so it's a weed that doesn't produce quite as many. Lamb's quarters, 57,000. One plant can produce 57,000 seeds. Doesn't mean they'll all survive, but it means that a lot of them will. And there's just a lot of weed material waiting there. So don't let your weeds go to seed. Whatever you do, if you go through and you just cut the tops off, if you're out there harvesting and you see one that looks like it's getting close to flowering, and just cut the top off or cut it off at the soil level, anything you do is a benefit. Mowing them, whatever. Okay, in the fall, and these things are not always exclusive to these seasons, but I've tried to put it together in a situation where it seems like it makes some sense in terms of when you might do it. Looks like I'm talking really fast. So we'll have lots of time for questions, so you can all be thinking of lots of questions. So in the fall, you might actually use herbicides for perennial weeds. And so something like um, glyphosate or Garlon, where you want the weed to still be actively growing because the plant needs to take up the herbicide and then it needs to translocate it down into the roots. If you use the same product in the spring, all the movement, most of the movement in the plant is going up, and so it will move it through the plant. It's systemic, but it moves it through the upper part of the plant. It's in the fall or late summer that we want to really apply it and have it then move down into the roots, and then it will kill the whole plant, as opposed to just burning the leaves off. Because with a lot of perennials, you can burn the leaves off, um, but that's not enough to keep the plant from coming back. So on the very first picture, there was one of bindweed, which it's low growing, except until it reaches the plant and starts climbing up. And it's really a problem because it's very viney. It looks like a morning glory. It's related. That one we did a test where we were treating either cutting it back or treating it with something that burned the weeds and burned the leaves. And that came back, it came back all summer long. You could practically watch it grow. It has a very fleshy root, and so it holds a lot of carbohydrates and so forth, so that if the top is damaged, it will grow back again. And so you have to do something that actually kills the plant all the way down to the roots if you're looking at fall treatment for perennial weeds. Again, tillage is often done in the fall, sometimes in either fall or spring. Sometimes people will leave plant materials on the field, um, or do a completely no-till system where they're planting into the stubble from the other plants. Again, that kind of goes along with other kinds of pest management. If you have diseases or insects in those plants, you don't really want to leave them on the field. You really rather take them off. But in terms of whether tillage is helpful or not, again, you need to know your weeds. So if you're tilling up purslane, you're spreading it. Um, if it's too late to bother, they've already gone to seed, then tilling, maybe you're spreading the seed around. Um, Kathleen, remind me that question when we get to the end, and I'll answer the Creeping Charlie mugwort question. And then something you can do, there's two things that you can do in the fall, again, can be done other timings, either tarping or solarization and cover crops. And though tarping and solarization are different. So with solarization, what you're trying to do is heat the soil up to a level that you are killing the weed seeds in the top few inches. So some people will do this in the summer. It depends. If you've got space in the summer, I'd say do it in the summer. It's probably faster to get the temperatures up. If you don't have space in the summer, then do it early in the fall. Or in the spring. They did some in Maine where they did tests and they found that with 2 weeks of May and June that they could actually get enough temperature to kill some seeds. So you want to till up the soil so that it doesn't have plant material on it. You want it to be moist, and then you're going to cover it with clear plastic because you want the sun to come through and hit the soil. It's not the plastic you're trying to heat up. You really need to heat up the soil. What you're doing is creating a sort of a greenhouse effect. Um, I'll show you a picture in a second. The other one is tarping, and there's lots of talk about tarping. It's also called occultation, which sounds like witchcraft somehow. But so then you're using an opaque plastic covering or of something that's impervious. And so it's usually black plastic, and you're actually trying to block the light and the photosynthesis to kill the weeds. And so that in cold weather, you might leave it 6 to 8 weeks. In warm weather, you might leave it 4, based on what heirloom soil also suggests. I've done some tarping. It's amazing how long the weeds will stay gone, because you think, well, as soon as you take it off, then you've got the potential for the weeds to germinate, more seeds to germinate. But it does really work well. If you're gonna till, make sure you need to do it before you're covering the beds. That's kind of a silly statement. How would you do it afterwards? So this is a project that we did with solarization. when we were going to put some beneficial habitat in. So you can see we've tilled it up. It's fairly moist, and we're covering the edges to hold the plastic down. Like anything, if you're putting plastic down, you've got to hold it down there. And then this is actually much later. So we had removed it. This is in the fall that shows that the solarization plots still had very little weed growth in them, depending on what was there as a problem. This is purslane. It seemed to really like it. It seemed very happy. It grew quite well under there. So this fabric, good heavens, something's going crazy here. It does let light through, so it's not preventing them from growing due to light. It's actually heating up the soil. So apparently, purslane is very happy with hot soils. The intent is actually to get it up to, well, in the middle of the summer, I suppose. I think we were getting it up to about 100 under the plastic. And it's worth putting a thermometer in there to see what's going on. This is tarping where you can see it's black plastic. It's also held down, got to hold it down with something around the edges. And then, so they're actually tarping the whole bed here, which means that's a big piece of plastic. And also think about how you might then roll this back up again so you can use it somewhere else the next time around. Um, Maybe you can just flop it over to the next bed. And so this is something, again, you might do it in the fall, but you might also say, okay, these beds, we're gonna be not using this part of the summer, and we'll tarp them, and then next summer we'll do another section, and so you kind of move it around so you get everything tarped over a period of years in your field. And then there's cover crops. And again, there are spring, summer cover crops. There's also winter cover crops. Winter ones are kind of nice if you've taken the plant material out from the crops, and then you can do the whole area with a cover crop. What you want for winter cover crops is early growth. You want them to cover the ground really quickly. You don't want anything that potentially can become a weed. People use buckwheat, and buckwheat can be um, a good ground cover, but if it sets seed, now you have buckwheat as a weed. And so you then need to think about, so you want to grow it fast and then you want to kill it. So some of them just die. You don't have to kill them. Sometimes people will roll them or till them in. And then some cases people will just plant into the residue. So it's all going to depend on how tall they are, how like if you put them in the late summer and then you've got good growth and then it just dies with the frost, that works. And then you're ready to plant in the spring and there's not much plant material left. If you're rolling it, you might have to wait until it breaks down, or then if you're tilling it, that should break it down. Um, and then so buckwheat is about 50 days, so it's very quick. It germinates in cool soils, so soils that are as low as 45. And so that's pretty impressive that you can plant it relatively late. You want to mow it off before it flowers. Field peas are another one. They can withstand frost, and oats. Oats need good seed soil contact, but can give you can give you a good cover crop basis. And so we're looking at different things too. Oats being in this case being a grass, and the other two being broadleaves. Um, Again, you might even use, some people will use herbicides to kill them off, and you need to have one that will actually kill off the cover crop that you've chosen. This is buckwheat, happily blooming. So they will have buckwheat for a long time there. Okay, a few things more to consider, and maybe I've sort of covered this, but so which are your worst weeds and why? Knowing something about that then helps you figure out where you really want to be using them and which methods do you have that you can manage them, and then how do they fit into your production schedule. So it doesn't matter if you've got a fabulous method for controlling weeds. If you need to be doing it in the middle of harvest, you're probably not going to get to it. And so knowing something about your whole production scheme and how all those things fit together, that will help. Robert, I'm going to hold you off until the end because I think I'm almost done. Oh, look at that. And I forgot to put my thank you slide in the end. Okay, so let's stop sharing.